So good evening, everyone, and
Okay, good.
good morning to those people that are joining us online from elsewhere. Welcome to another installment of our Japan-Canada Research and Policy Speaker and Network Series hosted here at Simon Fraser University. I'm Scott Harrison. I'm a research fellow at Simon Fraser University's David Lam Centre and the initiator and convener of this series. So it's a pleasure to have you join us in person and online here at the Vancouver campus. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Simon Fraser University's Vancouver campus is located on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we're grateful to live, work, and learn. Today's event, Strengthening the Canada-Japan Economic Partnership, is presented in collaboration with the David Lam Centre here at Simon Fraser University, as well as with support by the Japan Foundation. This series aims to foster dialogue and deepen understanding of the evolving relationship between Canada and Japan, particularly in the realms of research and policy. So one of the founding ideas behind this series is to gather individuals in person and online who not only want to hear from Japan or Japan-Canada experts from various fields, but also use the opportunity to connect with other like-minded individuals. I hope that the audience members, as well as the speakers, will stay connected well after this. Today, we're honored to have as our speaker, Mr. Trevor Kennedy. He's Vice President of the Indo-Pacific at the Business Council of Canada. He's located in and joining us from Tokyo. Trevor brings a wealth of experience in international trade and policy, and he will share insights into the current state and future prospects of Canada-Japan economic relations. His talk is going to touch on his personal and professional journey with Japan, work at the Business Council of Canada in the Indo-Pacific, and broader opportunities for strengthening bilateral economic ties. Mr. Kennedy is going to speak for approximately 20 or 25 minutes, followed by what will be the Q&A and discussion session. For those of us that are joining online, please note that your audio and video have been disabled. Please feel free to use the chat function to post questions and comments, and don't forget to those all after the presentation. I also would like to note that this event is being recorded, so we're aiming to have a version of this available for future viewing on David Lam Centre's YouTube channel in the coming weeks. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Trevor Kennedy. Trevor.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and really thanks to the David Lam Centre, the Japan Foundation, Scott, for arranging this. Really was not a hard sell to get me to come talk about Japan, so really happy to have the opportunity. As you mentioned, I have about 20-25 minutes here at the outset. I'm really going to focus a bit on my background with Japan. I know there's some students listening in, and just really to share a little bit about how that's kind of weaved through my career and where I am today, and hopefully provide a bit of context for where I'm coming from. But I also want to talk about my current work in the Indo-Pacific with the Business Council. This is a new operation for us, and really happy to share what we have in store. And then finally, I've been on the ground for about 9 months now, and really I've had a chance to work a lot with a lot of Japanese stakeholders, and I'm going to share a bit of what I've heard so far with some very recent developments, and I think opportunities to strengthen our bilateral economic ties. So I'm going to jump right in here. So my work with Japan has really taken place over the past 16 years. I've lived in the country 3 times. First for me was in 2009. I went to Japan as an exchange student. Really my first international experience aside from traveling to the US. I grew up in southwestern New Brunswick in a pretty small community. So this was a very different experience for me to live in Sapporo, to have a host family, to study Japanese. Really was my first really interaction with the country, with the culture. And it was a great one. I was there for, I think it was 3.5 months or so. Live with a host family, really forced me to learn some survival Japanese. My host family did not speak English, and I did not speak Japanese at all at the time. So it was an interesting experience, but really immerses you in the culture. And really, for anybody out there who's looking, I guess, at getting some experience, I can't encourage people enough to take advantage of exchange opportunities. I received a JASO scholarship, which I wasn't even aware I applied for, and it was just to show that there were a lot of resources available for students if they do want to go on exchange. I believe a lot of universities have unused funding for exchanges, so definitely please take advantage of that if you're interested in going to Japan. It was a great opportunity for me, and it was important because I decided at that time as an undergrad, I think it was my third year of university, that I really wanted to focus on the broader, then I guess, Asia Pacific region, but with Japan as an anchor. That was kind of a key takeaway for me. So if I never gone on this exchange, I don't know where my life would have ended up. So this was a really important moment for me, and I'm really grateful I jumped at that opportunity. My observation at the time was at that point, I guess, aspiring to be maybe more of an academic. I noticed that there were many Japan experts, people focus on economics and international relations, but there seemed to be a drop off in engagement. I think particularly after the bubble economy and with the rise of China. If you're a student at the time, you would have noticed that the really bulk of anybody focusing on Asia at that time was very focused on China, and obviously it made sense. It was a big rising economy, but I felt there was an opportunity to emphasize on a market that was still very important, and I believe was going to become more important for Canada. And I'm really happy that more or less played out the way I anticipated. So my next experience, I was determined to return. Like so many people who want to work on Japan, I returned with the JET program. I participated in the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. This is a program run by the Japanese government, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Education, and I think some other entities. But this brings in thousands of people every year, recent graduates from university. It's a pretty great program. It can at times be difficult to get in. I was really fortunate I got in when I applied, but I went directly from my undergraduate education to JET. And really, the plan for me was to really spend 3 years on the ground to get on the ground experience. I wanted to improve my Japanese. I wanted to understand Japanese culture more, really just understand the country. And JET's a great opportunity for that because you really get what you put into it. I mean, you have a job teaching English or as a coordinator of international relations at a local city hall. But you have a lot of time that you can use on your own, and I used my time to really learn as much as I could, travel throughout Japan, and also travel throughout the region. It was an interesting time to be in Japan because it was right after the Great East Japan earthquake. So I arrived, I think, 3 months after. It was maybe surprising to think now, but a lot of people were concerned about going to Japan at that time. I know certainly some people in my family didn't want me to go back then, and I had people in my cohort that actually turned down their posting out of concerns for safety. So people really appreciated folks who did go at that time. And fortunately, it turned out to be obviously very safe in most of the country, and even the people who ended up in Tohoku. I was in a city, Miki City in Hyogo Prefecture. This was also a really great experience for anybody who's maybe gone through the JET experience. You don't really get a chance to choose where you're going to go. I think you get 3 options you can apply for. I thought I was going to go back to Hokkaido, but I ended up in the Kansai region, which turned out to be a real blessing. Kansai is a very important cultural region within Japan, very distinct in many, many ways. And I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to see that side of the country and its view of Japan. It's obviously a very diverse country with many different perspectives. It's a lot more than just Tokyo. So really great that I had that perspective and spent that time on the ground. Very active in my community, and I was very pleased that upon leaving, I was recognized by the governor of Hyogo as a lifelong goodwill ambassador for the prefecture. So I have to say, if you are going to plan a trip to Japan, please go to Hyogo. It's a great microcosm of all of Japan, and very happy to share some tips on places to visit. The country went under a lot of changes at the time. I mean, sometimes it's great to think back about how much Japan has changed. Most, I think, were necessary. Starting from that 2011 period on. Obviously opening to more international residents, Japan liberalized trade, companies began to consolidate, and we saw the beginning of a pretty remarkable tourism industry today. And I just saw a stat just last week that over 550,000 Canadians visited Japan last year, which is pretty remarkable. But it certainly wasn't that way before, and you started to see that kind of rise of tourism more or less around that time. So all in all, great experience. Really happy to be involved in JET, and it's pretty amazing now when I especially deal with the embassy here, or I deal with other people who work on Japan in any capacity. It seems like almost everybody in some way has interacted with JET or has been participated in JET. So really great program. Really recommend anybody who wants to get some experience before starting their career or going on to master's degree or PhD or so on. It's probably the best way to really experience the country and to live in a smaller community get that understanding of a rural or small town Japan. And I should also mention I met my beautiful wife Yoshimi there, so that was also a very important part of my life. So really grateful to have that experience, and I still consider Kansai as my second home. So I returned to Canada in 2014, and kind of as I planned, following JET to complete a master's degree, I went to UBC. Then there was a program called the Master of Arts Asia Pacific Policy Studies, which was kind of a unique program focused on international relations, economic, public policy. Everyone had a focus on Asia as a common geography, but there are lots of different people with different focuses. There, I had a chance to work a lot more on other geographies, and I guess then the Asia Pacific region, folks, I guess worked on China, Southeast Asia, and other places. That was kind of new for me to have those different focuses and moving a bit away from Japan. And as I guess as an academic or somebody who was looking at academia, I was initially very interested in security. To be honest, that was initially what I hoped to work on for much of my career. But at that time, and given all that was going on in the world, and with I guess Japan and where it was moving with trade policy, I started to see that there was a real close connection between trade policy and security at the time. And so that led me to gradually work on more trade policy, and I eventually wrote my thesis on the securitization of free trade in Northeast Asia. I don't know how well it's held up, but the topic still seems relevant. So I'm really really grateful I had that chance to start working on trade more, and that led me a lot to the work that I'm doing today. Following UBC, or I guess after completing my coursework, I joined the Asia Pacific Foundation as a junior research fellow, and that was really the first time I had a chance to work on Canada, specifically Canada and Asia, and really at that time was also entirely on economic issues. That's what I was looking at the foundation, and then that led to an opportunity to join Global Affairs Canada and move to Ottawa. So that was kind of how I ended up in Ottawa, where I was for the past decade. So I joined as first a junior policy trade policy analyst, and then eventually as an officer. That's when the department was known as DFAT-D, or defeated. Very different era, but it was a great experience. For me, it was introduction to the policy community in Ottawa, which is a bit of a unique beast, and certainly something to experience. I worked in the global coordinating division and then eventually the government procurement division. And I should mention that neither of these experiences really had any focus on Asia, but I'm really also grateful for that. It had a chance to really broaden my horizons a bit, and to learn about Canada's international relationships more than just focusing on Asia. And that really led to the opportunity that I guess leads me to where I am today. In 2016, I joined the Business Council of Canada. I wasn't familiar with the organization beforehand. I had a coworker in the department who he said he reminded me of somebody who worked there, and he encouraged me to send my resume over. So really appreciate that person. I won't mention their name, but they did offer to send my resume to this contact. And fortunately, at the time, they were looking to hire. I wasn't aware there was a hiring process, but they were looking to bring on somebody to support with trade policy. And so I worked with our trade policy leads at the time, and really at that time there's a lot of focus on. We were expecting what was going to be the Clinton administration, but obviously there was a growing protectionism in the United States, and we wanted to be prepared for that. And my work previously in the government procurement division at Global Affairs by America was kind of a useful hook there. So over time, I mean, my work at the BCC didn't originally focus on Asia. There were lots of other international relationships and a lot of trade agreements that Canada was working on at the time. But over time, I became the policy lead, and eventually, I'd say probably the work that was most consequential in the work that we're doing today was we were an early and active advocate for the Indo-Pacific strategy. That's something we worked on with many of our members. And it's a really critical region for Canada, for many of Canada's leading businesses. And we thought it was important for Canada to have a broad strategy for engagement and to advance its interests. So we were an early advocate, and I mentioned an active participant in the strategy, and I think that kind of leads to the work that we're doing today. So for our history, the Business Council, we're CEO Council. We have 170 members. We've been around for close to 50 years now, and we're a policy and advocacy based organization. The bulk of our work has been conducted from Ottawa for our entire history, with travel and engagement with stakeholders. But we determined as our members became more global that we should evolve as well. And starting in 2023, we opened our first international office in Washington, D.C. So I have a colleague now who works there full time from our Washington office on the Canada-U.S. relationship. We brought on advisors now in Brussels and Mexico City to help with both the European Union and the Mexico relationship, which are very important. And I was honored to have the opportunity to lead the second step of our international expansion with the establishment of our Indo-Pacific office, which is anchored here in Tokyo. So I've been on the ground since September. We had official office opening in November, and this office will evolve over time. This is I have a posting here where I'm on assignment to help build our organization, and over time we'll bring on some additional capacity in other key markets. Given that the Indo-Pacific is so large, I find even when I'm traveling here, sometimes it surprises me how big this region is. It's pretty remarkable. And really what we're trying to do is we call this commercial diplomacy. Really our goal is to have a unique voice for the Canadian private sector abroad. We often work very closely with global affairs and with other stakeholders, but really, we're a completely privately funded organization, and really we're here to have our own voice and to provide our own perspective, and hopefully to reinforce Canada's broader efforts throughout the region. There's still a lot of work to do, and we really need to amplify, I think, Canada's presence and the awareness for Canada. And I think we're all working toward the same goal. So we're making our contribution through this office. So this leads, I guess, to my final point, which is the Canada-Japan partnership, and really what I see from my time here so far. I should mention that this is not a Japan-focused office. I work in Tokyo, though, which provides an opportunity to really provide some additional attention to this economy, and I spend my day-to-day here. So it does give I guess an opportunity. I would say that the relationship is very important. It's a very important relationship for Canada. It's actually become more important over time. But I do always have to mention people. It's an Indo-Pacific office, not a Japan office. So really, I think over the past several years, and I know there's some people on the call or in the room who have a long history working with Japan, so may take issue with what I'm going to say here. But my observation has been that I think that the relationship with Japan has evolved pretty significantly in the past, say, 5-6 years. This was primarily, I think, a commercial relationship. We obviously had good political relations, but it's really, I think, evolved into more of a strategic partnership. And I think you could point to a few points in history where that's become more of a common interest for both parties. But Canada and Japan both believe in the importance of the rules-based international system. We believe in the importance of international trade. We're firmly committed to democracy, and I think when you have this concept of like-minded, I think it applies equally to both partners. When I hear the Japanese talk about like-minded, I know they're referring to countries like Canada and vice versa. I know that's the interest for Canada as well. But we have a very long history of successful trade and investment ties. And as we move into a more dangerous world, it's unfortunate that this is maybe resulting in this closer partnership, but it does create opportunities to strengthen our bilateral economic relationship. I would say a broad focus for Japan, whether it's the private sector or the government, has been economic security. And that's not new. That's certainly over a decade, but possibly 2 decades now, where there's been a real focus on enhancing economic security. It's a more recent focus for Canada. This is a market that's trade dependent for I guess to keep prosperity here. At the same time, few natural resources, and at the same time, and there was even just some data last week in the Nikkei about how corporate Japan is increasingly dependent on their overseas investments for their overall economic situation. So Japanese businesses are investing more abroad. So it's once again there's a lot of concerns there, a lot of risks that Japan faces, and they're looking to de-risk wherever possible. And I think there's a real opportunity for Canada if we leverage our strengths to be a solutions provider for this market and for others. But we always have to be fast to respond to trends. If we can't help Japan, they will go elsewhere. So one very important element of this, I think, is the energy relationship. This could be a much more important part of our bilateral trade. Japan just released a new energy policy this year, the 7th Energy Strategic Energy Plan. This showed for the first time in several decades that demand for energy is actually going to go up in Japan, despite a declining population. So that's a remarkable change that's driven by reindustrialization, but also data centers and the new demands brought on by AI. But there's also a real interest in shifting to more secure suppliers. And so there's an opportunity for us there where there's existing demand to hopefully replace with a more reliable source of energy. For many years, and I remember several former ambassadors making this case, but certainly after Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, Japan's been very interested in looking to Canada as a source of various forms of energy, particularly LNG. We know that, including in Prime Minister Kishida's visit to Canada in, I want to say early 2023. But this is, a point that Japanese government and private sector raised on several occasions. So it's very exciting, and there was I think it was a feature story over the Global Mail just this past weekend. But LNG Canada is finally coming online. This of course includes Japanese investment, Mitsubishi being a major investor in the project. We'll start shipping imminently to Asia. It's the first time that Canada will enter a very lucrative gas market in Asia, and based on what we've heard from many, a lot of that gas will, and at least on the first phase, will go to Japan. So that should start to transform the relationship. We've had officials speak about this in a security lens before, that this is a really important supply to help diversify from Russia. Japan still imports gas from Russia. I think 9% of the country's demand. So, but not just from Russia. I think there's opportunities to also shift from other suppliers where there's maybe diminishing export capacity or greater risk. At the same time, we've seen Canada grow its energy trade through TMX. We're not shipping anything to Japan through TMX, as far as I'm aware. That's going to other markets, but also a great success story for Canada diversifying its energy exports. And something that doesn't always get enough attention, but is very important, is the growth of our LPG, liquefied petroleum gas exports. And in both the case of Japan and, I should mention, Korea, Canada's done extremely well in moving in and really growing those markets. So we've become very important suppliers of LPG to both markets. So I think we're heading in the right direction on energy, at least on some of these resources with phase one of LNG Canada. But we know there's capacity to bring this even further. There's a proposal for phase two, which we certainly hope will reach a final investment decision. And the Canada's west coast is particularly attractive to Japan because it helps to bypass choke points. Long before we heard about the president and his concerns around the Panama Canal, what we're hearing here over a number of years was concerns around low water levels and how that had the potential to disrupt shipping. So Canada's west coast obviously completely bypasses that risk, and then gas coming in from the Strait of Malacca or elsewhere from the Gulf also doesn't face that any other risks around geopolitics. So we have a very attractive value proposition. I think we just need to find ways to speed up and make sure that we can provide I guess the resources to the potential customers. We do have a reputation, unfortunately, for being slow and complicated as a place to build infrastructure. So we do need to change this perception quickly. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about this in our past elections. So hopefully we'll certainly overcome some of the challenges we faced. And as I mentioned, there are some success stories like LNG Canada, which we should all be very proud of. I always have to mention, and of course, to our membership, we don't just have members in the oil and gas industry, but they're members in other energy sectors. And within that, I think some other opportunities for Canada, Japan. Something that also fit in that energy policy review was a refocus on nuclear power as a form of fuel. As you know, it was quite sensitive after 2011, but there's a growing realization now that nuclear power is essential for Japan, not only for its energy security, but also to decarbonize. And the country still is very much committed to its climate targets. So in that, they'll need international partners to retrofit and build new reactors, which is part of the proposal. And they'll need reliable sources of fuel. And there, Canada is very well positioned. Some of the largest reserves of uranium in the world and the largest private sector miner. So I think we can be a very important partner in the nuclear supply chain. Canada is extremely well positioned globally. And of course, GE Hitachi is building a reactor in Darlington, Ontario. So that brings some Japanese technology into the Canadian nuclear space. So that's very important too. And then something that I think, in Canada, sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating. But Japanese industry is very interested in hydrogen, still believes that hydrogen could be a future form of energy, a very important form of energy for industry, but also for transportation potentially. And our market's just starting to form. Really, what I hear in talking to people here is that there's an opportunity for Canada. We're really well positioned geographically, and the assets are very good. But we'll have to be price competitive, and so we can't lean on the economic security strength here. So we're just going to have to be responsive. But a new market's forming. Korea is a bit further ahead of Japan in building a market, but there is a Northeast Asian hydrogen market that's forming, and potentially a place where Canada could play an active role. And on top of that, in terms of other resources, we are a large exporter of potash. I think the dominant exporter now in the market, which supports domestic food production. If you follow Japanese news, you'll know one of the big issues of the day is the price of rice here. So a lot of concerns around affordability of food and the domestic food supply. So obviously, being able to provide inputs that support increased output here is very much welcome. At the same time, Japan's always going to import a lot of food, meat, grain, seafood, other products, and we're well positioned in some of those markets, but there's certainly room to grow in some others. We have competition, but I think once again that geographic strength could really come to our advantage. And when you have a market that's very focused on economic security, Canada's brand should really be focused on how we can help to support that outcome. And then, of course, there's critical minerals. It's long-term interest for Japan to diversify its supply away from markets like China or over dependence on China. So we could be an important partner there, but that's I think a longer play and take a lot of investment and policy to make sure we're well positioned. A new area that's emerged, I think, in the past 3-4 years, and we'll see how far it goes. But I think there's a great opportunity is in defense. I mean, Canada and Japan are both investing more, will be investing more in national security, building up their military capabilities. We have limited experience, I think, working together to develop hardware, whether it's for aerospace, shipbuilding, or in space. But I do know that there are some Canadian companies very interested in looking at Japan, especially as it increases its defense budget, and vice versa. So I think a realm that we could explore further, and something that we could potentially do together in some areas. And then Canadian cybersecurity companies, it's a strength of Canada's. We've got some great world leading firms here, and they're certainly looking at the market to help enhance cybersecurity for both corporate Japan and for the government. So a few areas. I realize I've gone on a lot here. I have a couple more things I'm going to note, and I'll kind of end my formal remarks. But I've been really interested to see in the last couple of years, and maybe even the last year, the real growth and interest among institutional investors in Japan. And there are, I think, a lot of reasons for that. I mentioned before some of the corporate reforms going back to the early 2010s. But I think you can. I think there's greater confidence now based on a lot of the reforms that have kind of undergone in corporate Japan as a safe place to invest. The strength of the stock market obviously has attracted a lot of attention from global investors, and the fact that, relatively speaking, especially when you look around the region, the economic and political stability here has been attractive. So I think you've seen a growing interest in Canada's large investors, and it's one of our strengths globally. But I don't think this has been a major market for maybe many decades, but it does seem to have a growing interest. And of course, we know there's been a long history of investment from Japan into Canada, which we hope will continue and grow. And so obviously some uncertainty we have to overcome there, but I am confident that we'll still have a lot of investment coming in. And something that really has come up in the past couple of months, and I really think this should be a major focus for Canada, particularly on that investment attraction piece, is reliability. I'll be honest, one thing I was very concerned about, and still I'm concerned about when we look to the deal that Japan's negotiating with the United States. We'll see, I guess, at some point what that looks like. But I know in talking to some other partners around the region, some have kind of flagged to me that there could be instances where Canadian exports maybe suffer because those countries need to reduce their trade deficits, and there might be some efforts to shift supplies from one place to another. I'm less worried about that in Japan, to be honest, and part of the reason for that is what I'm hearing from industry here is a real concern around policy certainty, the reliability. The United States obviously wants more investment coming in, and they will attract investment. But there's concerns about what does policy look like in 4 years from now? What does it look like in 8 years from now? If you're building a pipeline in Alaska, if you're investing in an auto facility, if you're building semiconductors, what policy are you dealing with 2 to 4 years from now? So the policy changes, even if they become more attractive, they still generate some uncertainty and concern. And I think one characteristic of corporate Japan abroad has been a real preference, a comfort toward long-term stable investments. And I think there's an opportunity for Canada if, by contrast, we can present our market as a very reliable, secure place to do business and to make those long-term investments and just have that certainty. So I think really a potential for Canada to lean in on and benefit from. Two other just really quick points before I conclude. For many years, Canada and Japan wanted a trade, well, I guess Canadians more so maybe than the Japanese, but we wanted a trade agreement, and we were negotiating the CEGEPA. Eventually we did secure our bilateral agreement in the context of the CPTPP. So it's great that we finally have our trade agreement. We've now, I guess, it's been enforced now for, I want to say 6 or 7 years. I'm not sure, but it's been enforced for a while now. So it's great, and we've had some success stories that have come out of it. But beyond being a bilateral agreement, it's increasingly looking like it'll be it could be the foundation for a rules-based trade in this part of the world and maybe more broadly. So it's really important that as two countries that are really committed to rules-based trade, I think the CPTPP could become more important over time, and I think certainly as the leading economies in that framework. Now Canada, I guess, would be the third largest economy with the UK joining, but we are still one of the large economies along with Japan, and I think we can certainly lead the way in strengthening this framework and kind of underpinning global trade as the global system comes under greater pressure. And then my final point, and this is more of an exploratory issue, but it's something I've heard more in other parts of the region. And especially as Canada looks to expand in Southeast Asia in particular, one of the things that we've heard time and time again dealing with governments and private sector in various markets in Southeast Asia is, if you want to be successful, not only look to the example of companies from Japan, but also Korea, but look for areas where you can collaborate. And really, we've been encouraged to look at partnering with, say, Japanese companies, the Japanese government on infrastructure projects and other capacities. I haven't found any examples of this to date, but I know there's a real interest there. Certainly, as Southeast Asia becomes a more important market for Canada, something we should consider doing in partnership with our like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific region. So anyway, I think I went through a few different points there, and I know I spoke for quite a while here, so it may be a good time for me to stop. But just say that I think we have a really strong economic partnership. I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow our relationship even further, and really excited to work on this over the next couple of years, and hopefully we'll make some important gains. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Trevor. We have plenty of time for discussion, general observations, questions both online or by here in. We do have a mic that we can pass around. Oh, you ask the question, you just please introduce yourself before you ask the question.
Okay.
So we'll have an idea.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation, and I have a question. My name is Ben, and I'm a citizen of Canada for a long time, and the major point of conflict in the current trade war initiated by the United States with almost the rest of the world is the balance of trade. So I'm wondering what is the balance of trade between Canada and Japan? I do believe that it should be heavily in favor of Japan. And how do we strengthen our partnership with Japan is that currently the three Canadian automakers, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, are, almost, in a kind of downside, given that the Americans say that we don't need cars from Canada. So one way to do that is for Japan to open their market to Canadian cars and to import cars from Canada. So this balance of trade, I don't have the numbers. You have probably the numbers about the balance of trade between Japan and Canada. So how do we make it a little bit of a fair or fairer balance is the question. So I think Japanese are the side who should really initiate more investments in Canada and more imports from Canada. Thank you.
Great, thank you for the question. So this is a bit of a unique circumstance, I think, for us in the region, but we actually have a trade surplus with Japan in goods, which is a bit unique, and I think historically wouldn't have been the case. We export a lot of products to Japan, food and natural resources. We do also import many products. I think the trade is something like we export 15 or $16 billion and maybe import I don't know, 12, $13 billion from Japan, something like that. I'd have to look at the latest numbers. But it's actually grown, and Japan's become I want to say our third largest export market globally. So it's actually increased in the global rankings I think overall by two-way trade, it's also our third largest trade partner, but certainly as an export market, we've done well. And based on some of the things I mentioned around energy, our trade balance, our surplus will probably grow even further. based on current trends. So, I think it's kind of the opposite issue. I wouldn't say it's an issue. I mean, trade balances, I don't think are indicative of a problem. There's comparative advantage, lots of considerations there. Obviously, the United States is very interested in trade balances, and I think they're going to have a very complicated discussion with the Japanese on how they manage that. Japan is already buying a lot of products from the United States, and certainly more so after the first phase of their trade agreement that was negotiated under Prime Minister Abe. But I think they'll certainly make an effort to buy more from the U.S. as will other jurisdictions. But if you look across Asia, we have quite a range. I mean, you look at market by market, but in the case of Japan, we do have a trade surplus, and one that will probably grow even further. And then on the investment side, this is a story that I don't think is. I'd have to double check to see if this is still accurate today, but we going back 30 years now, we've had a lot of investment from Japan into Canada and into manufacturing. In our auto sector, I believe half of the jobs among the auto makers are actually from Japanese investment between Toyota and Honda, so larger than the big three automakers in terms of employment. And that may still be the case. My data point would be 3-4 years old at this stage, but I imagine it's still pretty consistent. So at least when it comes to this market, we have brought in a lot of investment over the years. I think the Japanese economy has evolved a lot in the past 30 years. Still is a major exporter of manufactured goods, but also a major investor and manufacturer abroad. And so in that sense, so if you look at that as a positive or a negative, I think we've been a beneficiary. I think for many of the companies that do invest in Canada, obviously there's a great interest in the North American supply chain, and so that's something we're going to have to navigate. I think it's a great source of anxiety for Japanese industry right now, not only managing their bilateral relationship, but ensuring, I think, a shared interest in the strength of the North American supply chain. So I think it's obviously something Canada is going to have to work on with the United States and Mexico. But there's a long history of investment into Canada and into the region. There were other automakers that don't have that history, I guess, of investment in the region, and may have to pivot, I guess, based on some policy changes. But yeah, I think so far it's been pretty good for us, and I've never received an actual dollar figure in terms of LNG Canada and then in terms of the impact it'll have on our trade flows. But it's 14 million tons of gas per year. If half or more of that goes to Japan, I believe that's in the billions of dollars per year in terms of additional exports from Canada. So that trade surplus should grow even further.
We have more questions up front here.
Erin Williams with the Asia-Pacific Foundation of Canada. Nice to see you again, Trevor. My question is, I just wanted to understand a little bit more about the BCC, the members who are active in Japan, and you talked quite a bit about energy and mining, but can you just kind of give me a sense of the composition in terms of what sectors they're interested in? Is it mostly larger companies? Is it, SMEs? And then I guess the last question is just, I know you've been in your position less than a year, so this might require some historical knowledge that you're not expected to have, but do you have any sense of the BCC members who are active in Japan? Have they been active in the Japanese market for a long time, or are you finding there are people coming in, like sort of new companies, new Canadian companies who are discovering Japan, new sectors? And then, sorry, I know this is a very, very layered question, but then if I could just tack on one more question. Are you aware of any kind of sectors in Canada where there's potential for growth in terms of doing business with Japan? And I guess what would you like to see in terms of new members?
So thanks for that. Yeah. So I think I can kind of blend the first and second questions together. When I look at the current companies that are here right now, we have obviously some service providers that are here, both in the IT space and the insurance space, and also institutional investors, an auto parts sector, the aerospace sector. Really, I mean, so it's interesting in the case that we in some cases we ship things here, we export products here. So there's not always an operator. There might be a sales office, but we have a number of companies who export products to market who don't necessarily have a large operation on the ground, but it's an important market for them. Versus some companies that have a large staff, like a Manulife, for example, which is one of the large insurance companies here. They have a presence, and you see on the subway some really successful, great advertisements. It's always I'm really happy to see a Canadian brand. You see some of the fashion brands like Canada Goose, some great flashy stores now in Tokyo. There's a great one in Ginza and another one in Omotesando. But you see those kinds of brands that are really showing up more often. And if you go into a Costco, you see a lot of Canadian products. I understand that Canadian pork is sold pretty proudly, and Costco is one of the kind of feature products. So we've done really well. I think the way I would define, I think there's been two eras of our relationship, and that goes for a lot of our companies here too. I think there are a lot of companies that were in this market going back 30, 40 years, maybe longer, and many of them maintain their presence over a number of years. So, it may have been lucrative for them, or it's just maintained a part of their business. But I think, that there was a period of time when there was obviously a less of an emphasis on this market. I think looking at more of the fast growing markets in Asia, particularly China, and I think that did take away a lot of focus from this market and the opportunities. I am seeing a new era, a new generation, I guess, of businesses that are looking at the market that don't historically have a presence here. That's not something I would have expected, say, 10 years ago. So I think the environment, I didn't really get a chance to explain this in some of my history, but in that I guess that 16 or so years, it's, for folks who have been working with Japan for a while, it really can't state how much this country has changed. The economic opportunities have changed. It's really dramatic. Really, I'm happy to see in a sense too. But I think that there's been, I think, a growing interest in the market, and certainly, and I should, they're not a member of ours, but as you may know, there's a really large, merger going on, or a potential merger going on with Arimaten Cristal that's looking at purchasing 7-Eleven, which would be actually the largest. I think it'd be the largest merger in Japanese history of at least a foreign company coming in and acquiring a Japanese brand. So in that sense pretty significant, right? And you've had a lot of institutional investors and other places invest in real estate or other areas. But I do have a lot of companies that are new here. I think where you have entirely new areas, when I talked about the energy sector, right? We weren't in a position to really service this market. So if you look at our traditional energy sector, Japan was really off limits, right? You didn't have the infrastructure to support this market. So that to me is an entirely new feature of our relationship. Aside from the nuclear sector, we do have a history of exporting uranium here, at least historically, and I think we're exporting coal as well. But more recently, I think when you look at LNG, if you look at hydrogen, you look at other forms of energy that could emerge. That's all brand new, and that brings entirely new sectors to this market that weren't here before. They won't necessarily set up an operation here, but they'll see this as a key market for exports. And I do think that we've, I guess, successfully been able to other parts of Asia. I don't know if the energy sector is really looking seriously at other parts of Asia as clearly as they are now at Northeast Asia. Between Japan and Korea, I think there's a really clear understanding that there's a great opportunity here, and I should say also China as well, and some other large markets. It's kind of further from that where we'd have to be a little bit more ambitious about where we can get our products. But I think here there's certainly a lot of interest in getting more resources to this market. So that brings in an entirely new sector. So I think that covered the topics. I know there's a third question, but I think that aligned with maybe the third question too, if I'm not mistaken. But did I miss something on the third point?
Good, thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Trevor. I don't think we've met. My name is Andrew Horvath, and I'm a former journalist. So in keeping with the reputation of journalists, let me be a little bit more precise. And you mentioned pork. Pork's been around, Canadian pork has been around in Japan for a very, very long time. And you mentioned uranium. I believe uranium is enriched in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. I don't believe that we have any facilities, but maybe if I'm wrong, we know. As for Canada Goose, that's also been in Japan for a very long time. Maple syrup's been in Japan for a long time. What is there something that is new, that you can point to in the last year or so, or maybe 2 years? We're really interested in how the relationship is developing and broadening. And yourself mentioned that you benefited a lot from your time in Japan as an exchange student and later as the JET program. Clearly, that means that there must be a lot of Canadians who know a lot about Japanese customs, Japanese business manners, so on and so on. So it comes as a little strange to me that, for example, 7-Eleven and Alimentation Couche-Tard is taking a year to make any kind of progress, and that the resistance in Japan against this merger is enormous. So can you fill us in on the nitty-gritty, something that if I were still an active journalist, I could put in a headline? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I mean, I think one very big one I mentioned before, and that's natural gas. I mean, that's entirely new for Canada, and that will be billions of dollars, and could account for. I don't want to get the numbers wrong. Really, this is something I've tried to figure out for many years now. But what's the current dollar value? But you know, this could be a very noticeable, massive impact of our trade relationship with Japan. So natural gas is a very, very big one. And that quest for Canada to diversify, I think one area where we actually are going to move the needle. So we should be really excited about that and entirely new. You know, on the 7-Eleven question, once again, they're not a member of ours. The company, I guess, Couche-Tard is not a member of ours. So I'm operating purely from an external perspective here. I will say that it's not. There is a richer debate in Japan. Maybe it's not always on the surface, but you know, I know that there are people here who think it's important that the government does not show that it's intervening or is not intervening in the process. And so far, I don't think there's been any government intervention. They want to attract more investment here. They want to show that Japan's open. I'm not sure where things will go. Actually, at the moment, it seems like it's pointing towards Couche-Tard being successful. I think the obstacles that they were facing have gone away. I think, you know, if this does go ahead, and if 7-Eleven, I mean, the concern here that people have is the quality of food declining in the 7-Eleven. As you probably know, there's really great food in the 7-Eleven, you know, onigiri and sandwiches and everything else. So if this does go ahead and that quality doesn't slip, or the quality of the company doesn't change, then I think that'll be a really powerful symbol of or a powerful example for Japanese investor or companies that, you know, they don't have to, I guess, historically have put up a lot of obstacles, I think, for international investors. You're seeing some of this play out too with the auto sector right now too, which wouldn't be a major play for Canada, but you know, there's lots of questions about the future of Nissan, for example, and what that looks like. So, and whether or not there'll be an international investor that comes in and takes on a large stake of that company. So there's a lot of things that are changing. It's not always a straight line, but I do see a Japan that's opened up a lot. You know, corporate governance has improved here pretty dramatically, and I think you know, there's a lot more investor interest here, and I think people like Warren Buffett and others have really kind of spearheaded some of that. That's, you know, obviously investing in the big trading houses has really changed things. I mentioned the defense sector. I mean, this is not something we've had a chance to really explore yet, like I said, but you know, we need to build submarines and shipbuilding capacity. There's, I think, an interest in building up aerospace capacity here. We have certain skills that we can trade with one another, capacities we can trade with one another. I'm not sure anything will result in any business, but I do think there's an interest there in exploring some opportunities to work together. And the defense sector, security sector, that's entirely new for this bilateral relationship. It's not something we've explored before. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, and I think particularly as we look to diversify some of our partnerships. And so I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic here. But even going back to the pork question before, you know, we have grown our exports to pork. We have been an exporter here for a long time, but after the CPTPP, Canada did grow its market share pretty significantly. There are other products where we haven't been as successful, but I think the industry would point to the CPTPP as kind of the moment that helped to really open up that market. And actually, for a time, we had an advantage over the U.S. market because they left the TPP negotiations, and it was several years until they concluded their phase 1 trade agreement. So we did have a bit of a first mover advantage in a sense. I wouldn't be able to speak to the others, but yeah, I think there are some great new opportunities, and the folks who've been here a long time are still doing well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see Laura. Yes, maybe we can.
Hello, my name is May Terasawa. I'm working at the Asia Pacific Fund Asia-Pacific Foundation Canada. I have two questions. First is, you mentioned there are some emerging sectors that Canada has comparative advantage and seek to have more growth in Japan. For example, cyber, IT, and space companies. Is there any obstacles for Canadian companies to kind of operate and grow in Japan that needs policymakers' attention to try to reduce the obstacles? And second, is there anything Canada seeks to increase the export from Japan? Is there any sector that Canada's trying to like strengthen the trade relationship with Japan by importing the Japanese products? Thank you.
No, thank you for the question. I mean, I'll still say that this is still an intimidating market, I think, for many people. If you don't have a history here, the barrier to entry can be pretty high. I think you see that for some of the companies that are scoping out and looking at building up their presence. It does take time. Once Japan's gone through a lot of reforms over a number of years, but it's a unique economy. It operates a certain way that's maybe a bit different than what Canadian companies are used to. I'll say, as a broad sense for the Canadian private sector. Setting aside some really great success stories, a lot of our leading businesses are not truly that global in the sense that they're not in a lot of international markets. They operate in several markets. The United States has been obviously very important for Canada. It will continue to be important. But I think when companies are looking at diversifying, they have to look at markets like this and other markets and figure out how they can navigate. So there's a bit more homework to be done, I think, to figure out how to navigate. I do hear companies that are interested in trying to find ways to build relationships here, how to get to the policy community, how to get to the business community, and I think it does take some additional work. So and really that's just a matter of investing in time and relationships and figuring out some of the unique features of this business community. But I think it's not as closed as it used to be, and I do think there's a real emphasis here, certainly coming from the government and the key ministries to really open up. But I think you have to meet Japan halfway a little bit. So I know a lot of our companies are exploring and some of those sectors, particularly in some of the services sectors that have not been here historically, just trying to figure out how you do business here. They see the opportunity, they're just trying to figure out how to get in and be successful. And I think success stories often, and this is not just for this market, this is for other markets, but I think Canadian companies obviously take inspiration from other great success stories. And I know I'm talking about Japan today, but there are other markets in the region that I could point to where I think over time you've built momentum because you've seen a number of success stories, successful expansions. And I think that's important here to have some great success stories that people can point to that'll drive some interest. But I have been pleasantly surprised in recent years whenever we try and engage executives or companies, if this market comes up, I see greater interest today than there was 5-10 years ago. And I'm really, really encouraged to see that. I think broadly speaking, the Canadian private sector interest in the Indo-Pacific region is much more diversified now than it used to be. China is still a very, very important market. I don't want to understate the importance of China as a place for business for some companies, but that's not the entire region anymore. And I think there are companies that are willing to look at individual parts and find out where they have a strength that they can play to. And I think what I would say is more broadly, the companies that are interested in this market often tend to also be interested in a market like Korea. There are similar market dynamics that I know there's some folks not always happy to have the comparison made, but they're advanced economies, that like-minded framework. A lot of the strengths that we have apply to both markets, and that goes for natural resources and others. And so I think there's a real opportunity for companies to look at this more as a kind of a North Pacific region and to find opportunities that maybe apply to both markets. And it's also encouraging to see closer collaboration between Japan and Korea, which we certainly should all hope continues. So anyway, I don't know if that was a way of answering the question or not, but I think there's a lot of work to be done to be successful. And I'd say another challenge, and this is just not to disparage anybody's work, including our work, but I think there's still a lot of work to do for Canada to build its profile here, right? There's whether it's with policy leaders or at the business community, we're not always top of mind, right? There's a lot of work we need to do in I think Japan to build our profile. There's a lot of obvious synergies, obviously our geography, our West Coast, but we probably need to be better salespeople in promoting those opportunities A few folks in the ministries and private sector may know what exists out there, but I don't think most Japanese business leaders really have Canada top of mind, and we really should work to build a relationship like they have with Australia or even with the UK now, where those always come up as kind of strategic partners and kind of de facto like-minded partners. And I do think Japan will put a lot more emphasis on those relationships soon. So hopefully Canada is seen as one of those key partners, and likewise, it's good to have that messaging coming out of Canada too, that the partnership with Japan is very important.
Thank you, Trevor. We're going back to the back of the room and then front of the room again.
Well, Japan is, Japan is sure in need of energy now and for the future. And we had this LNG project in the Kitimat right on the Pacific. And, there was a discussion about this project, for a few years. And the Malaysian company came forward $35 billion of investment, and Japanese didn't even move. There could be a purchase agreement to purchase the LNG, from Canada. And my concern is actually that Japan is taking Canada for granted for their friendship, their accessibility, and their availability. So we are right across the Pacific. This is a great clean energy from Canada, secured, and Japanese didn't come forward to invest and didn't come forward to discuss a pre-purchase agreement. I don't know what's going on in their mind. Thank you.
Well, just in response to that, I mean, even if it's not Japanese companies investing in it, that's not necessarily always a direct connection to where the cargo will go. So, LNG Canada, there were 5 partners in the project, I believe. I'm going based on what I've heard from industry. I mean, I think this is the market that's closest by and where there's a clear demand. So I expect that most of the LNG Canada shipments under phase 1 will come to this market. Some will also likely go to Korea, and some could end up in China as well. TMX, again, another project that would all went to, I think, largely China right now. So the projects, they exist, but the cargoes can end up in very different places. But I think there's a real strength for Canada and Northeast Asia in particular, given once again the lack of any choke points, and so whether or not the investment comes from one place or another. I will just say on a Japanese investment side, there's I'm not sure if there'll be other trading houses investing in infrastructure. There's 4 or so projects off our west coast that seem to be commercially viable, and there's a lot of interest in. There could be more across Canada and developing particularly LNG export infrastructure. It'd obviously be fantastic if Japanese companies were some of the large investors in those projects, but even if they aren't, I think we would expect that most of those shipments do end up in the Indo-Pacific region one way or another, and Japan is our closest neighbor across the Pacific Ocean. So I expect that'll continue to be a major feature of that relationship. But yeah, I think the investment could come from a lot of different places, and just LNG Canada alone, this investment from I guess through the companies, Malaysia, Korea, China, Japan, and I'm not even sure where Shell is headquartered these days, but I guess that's either the Netherlands or the UK. So and they're the largest partner in the project. But I have no reason to believe that gas is heading to Europe, right? It's going to go to Asia.
We have another person that hasn't added the question yet, so maybe we can prioritize that.
Someone new.
Wasn't the question at the back there? Oh,
Hi, I just want to follow up on what you said before, that you see some, that Japan was a difficult market to enter in the past, but it's getting easier to enter. And I'm curious about that because the treatment that Nissan got, quite aside from whether Carlos Ghosn is guilty or not is another matter, but it got a lot of bad publicity for Japan. And now with Pushtar taking so long, there's this feeling that there's a lot of pushback. It's not necessarily from the government, but it's from a general sense that this is one of these Japanese companies that although of course it started with Southlands in Texas, it really has become a Japanese. The kombini is a Japanese phenomenon, and so there's a sense of identity and so on. Now, that said, at the same time here in Canada, we're facing the Trump tariffs, and Prime Minister Carney has really made a point of looking for alternative markets, and Prime Minister Carney actually did work in Tokyo before, so one would sort of expect that maybe there is a push in that direction as well, not just in Europe, not just towards European markets. Do you see anything? Do you see any developments, either in terms of greater receptiveness on the part of Japanese to accept overtures from Canada, and do you see any overtures from Canadian companies? If you do, I mean, I know that you're not in the business of spilling the beans, but if you could give us something optimistic, it would be really be interested. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, I do, once again, I mean, there's been a lot of major acquisitions, potential acquisitions in recent history that generated a lot of attention. Another big one is obviously Japan investing, Nippon Steel investing in U.S. steel, which is, I think, attracted even more attention here in the media. And I think there was a bit of a shock to how things evolved, but it's not over yet. And so, but I know that sometimes has even been wrapped up in the conversation around 7-Eleven. And once again, I have no reason to believe the government is interfering or affecting that potential merger right now. There was Japanese companies that tried to. I think Itochu, for example, was working with the founding family for 7-Eleven, or as you know, the owning family of 7&I Holdings, I should say, right? Because that's the actual company. But I think there's that conversation around. Japan invests a lot of money abroad. It's becoming more important a feature of the economy here and the bottom line of leading companies. So, if it's going to have access to international markets, it needs to also be open to investment here, as long as it's in a non-secure sector, strategic sector. I don't know what will happen with Nissan. You may have read the news last night. I think there were 20,000 jobs cut in Nissan. Half of that was domestic and half of that was international. That's going to be a major political issue here. I don't know how the government plans to respond, but it's a company that obviously is going through some challenges right now, and I'm not sure where it ends up. And you've had companies, I think, like Foxconn and others that have made overtures to come in and save it. So at a point in time, it will be interesting to see if that maybe is the opening of the auto sector here. In a sense, I mean, well, the auto sector in the sense that there are lots of foreign cars here. They're mostly from Europe, right? But there in terms of whether or not there's openness to foreign ownership, and obviously there's a long story with that company in particular. We'll see what happens with 7-Eleven. I think it once again could be a really interesting moment for Japan, right? A kind of a wake up call, and if it goes well and people see that it doesn't result in the reduction of quality. But you look at a lot of leading companies here, the management teams, right? There's a lot more. Well, first of all, reporting in English now. There's people on boards from international business communities, executives, international executives here. Like a lot of things have changed in the past 15 years. Obviously, still a long ways to go, but I think you can trace the kind of trajectory of the stock market here to some of the opening and reforms and the greater comfort that people have. On kind of on an encouraging note, while there wasn't a whole lot of focus in the campaign around the Indo-Pacific region, I think later on Prime Minister Carney did mention this market and other markets specifically, as you noted. He spent time in Tokyo, which I don't think we've all heard very much about, but it'd be kind of curious to hear what his experience was like, and if it was a positive one, and if that equips him to have hopefully a positive relationship. It seems like he had a good discussion with Prime Minister Ishiba early on. He made reference to that in one of his first press conferences after the election. I think what the Japanese are doing, and I think Canada will probably do to some extent. I mean, this is an observation for what the government's doing here, but I think there's kind of three tracks for engagement in the world right now. There's a U.S. track, which has to be very pragmatic, and obviously they want to have a deal. They want to manage the current crisis they're facing quickly. There's a real political sensitivity here coming into an upper house election. So the Japanese government obviously wants to set aside this dispute with the United States and doesn't want any major changes to their relationship if they can avoid it. So there's a real emphasis on that right now. And I'll say working with stakeholders in business, it's really taking up a lot of the oxygen right now. So until there's a deal with the United States, I think there'll be limited opportunities to really look at other opportunities to collaborate, but hopefully there'll be some clarity soon. Separately, Japan is working really closely to stabilize its ties with China. And, just even 2 weeks ago, I know the Prime Minister, I believe, sent a letter. The head of Komeito delivered it for him to Xi Jinping. And there's been kind of this ongoing discussion around a state visit here at some point. So I think, it's really the repeat of in a sense, the Abe approach to managing the Trump administration, right? Which is you obviously try to manage your U.S. relationship, you try to reduce your tensions with China, and at the same time, and this is where Canada comes in, you make a real investment in working with your like-minded partners. And I'm not sure where all this goes yet. Last time it came in the form of the CPTPP, right? Japan was really the champion for that agreement, and fortunately Canada was a participant too. But there's this discussion now around the CPTPP working with the European Union. I don't know what that looks like, but that's a really interesting development, and it's now come up in several discussions with CPTPP countries. What else comes out from this focus on like-minded partners? And I think that's kind of that third track. And I'm still kind of waiting to see where the opportunities are, but I'm hopeful that. And I would even say like our relationship with Japan, I think, is very much defined by almost that first Trump administration, right? We all had to work together to build partnerships on a bilateral basis. The Canada-Australia relationship, the Canada-Korea relationship. I think there are a lot of countries in the region you could look to where you could find almost a new track emerge from that time period where we had to go out on our own and build these partnerships, and there was a shared interest in doing that. And so I'm optimistic, but we're starting in a really great spot. And I've used this term before, but I think we're in a golden age of Canada-Japan relations. It's far better than anything I ever expected, and I'm really happy to see where things are today. I just would like both countries to, when they talk about strategic like-minded partners, to keep each other in the top of mind. And I think we both have work to do in that regard to make sure we're at the top of the attention, I guess, of the public's mind.
Well, thank you, Trevor. We have another. No, I think you're next there.
Thank you. Hi, Trevor. It's Erin again. I was just wanted to pick up on that point about the CPTPP. And do you have any sense of, and I'm, kind of making a mental note of the point you were just making about how, stabilizing the relationship with China and US is going to consume a lot of energy, but just in terms of CPTPP expansion, in general, is Japan very pro-expansion, kind of like the more the merrier? Or is it really kind of like is it more of a sort of, it depends? I mean, China and Taiwan both have these kind of applications that haven't been decided upon. So that's one question. And then I guess another question is, do you get any sense just from your time on the ground there about what kind of role Japan would like Canada to play within the CPTPP? Like we've just concluded our, kind of sharing of the CPTPP commission, but do you feel like, again, now that we've got, a new prime minister, there's a lot of discussion about kind of renewal of Canadian diplomacy. Do you think, or do any of your counterparts in Japan think that there's a role that Canada could play that it isn't playing in CPTPP? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. By the way, Erin, before I should say, it's great to see you again. I know we worked together many years ago, and it's great to see you virtually. I think Japan has an oversized role in the expansion question. I think, there hasn't, to my knowledge, you've had officials comment before about certain applicants, for example, but I don't know if Japan has been as active in terms of championing specific applicants for the framework. And I think it's been obviously a challenging environment those first few years. You've had a lot of markets put up their hands to say they're interested in joining, some more sensitive than others. You obviously want to find consensus. There are a lot of markets, though, where I don't think there's any sensitivity, and there could be a lot more to do. I really think Japan has a big role to play in this. If they were to work with, I want to be sensitive about mentioning certain markets, but there are certain markets here that have not expressed interest yet, or have signaled some interest but have not formally applied yet, that I think would be really could be really meaningful additions to the framework. And I think having Japanese support for that, and hopefully support them, within the TPP, you have a wide range of countries with very different interests. We all support rules-based trade, but I think we talk about those like-minded partners. You're really looking at, I think, Japan, Canada, Australia, now the UK, and New Zealand as well, as kind of falling in a certain worldview. Where I think Japan could play a leading role in really championing the expansion and even publicly signaling support for certain applicants. It's something we've actually done in the past as an organization. They just haven't taken the formal steps yet, but we'd love to see Korea join the CPTPP. It's something that the government's discussed numerous occasions in the past, private sector as well. They just haven't formally submitted their application. There is a bit of a complicated consultation process internally in South Korea, but that'd be a great addition to the agreement. I think it would make a lot of sense. And, we share so many interests. It's a really good partner for Canada. It's a good partner for Japan. It's a good partner more broadly in the Indo-Pacific. And, if they ever do take that formal step, hopefully there'd be support from Japan and Canada, and we could sort out whatever issues we have to arrange in the context of that negotiation. But those are the types of markets that I think would be really, really meaningful. In terms of the role that we can play, this I don't know if it'll come out in the context of this discussion, but sometimes I think what I hear sometimes in this region is that, the Japanese obviously very interested in what we can do to help bilaterally and support economic security here by shipping our resources and other things that we can do. But some of the message we also get is, how can you once again help with Southeast Asia? How can you help in other parts of the region? And these are of great interest to Japan as well. And I think on that question of energy security or building infrastructure, other things, I think if Canada plays a more active role, whether it's through its private sector or through the government or in collaboration, to providing economic opportunities and development, I think that's very much welcome and supported. But I think I think we have a good relationship, and I'll be obviously watching very closely. Prime Minister Ishiba will make his visit to Canada, I guess in theory, in June for the G7. I could see at some point in the not too distant future the Prime Minister coming this way as well, and I assume he'll receive a warm welcome. And really, really looking forward to seeing how the relationship evolves between these two prime ministers.
Thank you, Trevor. We have a question from an audience member online. Yamamoto-san from the Japan Foundation. So just hold on a moment while we unmute you, so you can ask your question directly.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, we
great. Hey, nice to meet you. My name is Noriko Yamamoto, and I am the Executive Director of the Japan Foundation Toronto. Thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. And then as part of, on behalf of the Japan Foundation Toronto, we are very much pleased to be part of this speaker series initiated by the Simon Fraser University to develop the dialogue and network among the scholars who are doing between Japan and Canada and policy and economy matters and issues. And we are very much interested in exploring those networks is because in this current era, the relationship between Japan and Canada becomes even more important. And I believe that those networks among the professionals who are doing about Japan-Canada matters and are definitely be a foundation of the future development of the relationship. And my curiosity for you is that I just read your sort of the bio, and then you are involved in some, the community or network. But what sort of Japan-Canada community or network you belong to, and what sort of benefit that you think you can get from that network? Those reasons why I'm asking is, to my knowledge, compared to others like association, like Japan Studies Association or Language Education Association, there is not necessarily the existing solid network among those policy relevant professionals or scholars in Canada with regard to Japan. And so that's the one of the reason why I'm just asking what sort of community you belong to and what expectation for the future. This is the first question. And a second question also is a little bit related to the first question is, as you mentioned in your talk, that Canada's recent forecast to Southeast Asia, and it's same as Japan. Japan also has a strong forecast to Southeast Asia. And I think both two countries have interest and forecast on these areas. And what is the sort of expectation that Japan and Canada can do together to do more in Southeast Asia, especially in with regard to the program to nurture the next generation who can deal with those issues of those areas. So yeah, those are my questions. Thank you.
No, well, thank you for that, and I really appreciate the foundation's support for this this event here today. In terms of networks, I'm a part of. Different points in time. I was involved with the Jet Alumni Association. When I lived in Vancouver, I used to participate in I forget the name of the organization, but there is a Canada Japan Association in Ottawa. There's the same thing. I've never joined in these organizations as a member, but I obviously supported events. There was always a great Mochitsuki and Natsumatsuri in Ottawa that I always used to attend and with my family. I think among the I guess folks who work in policy on Japan, it's a pretty small network in Canada. So I'm familiar with a lot of the folks, I guess, in government and others who have, I guess, worked around this space for some time. It's mostly people in government. I think a lot of people at Global Affairs, for example. But no formal community. I mean, this is just me sharing my thoughts. And it's something I've actually raised with the ambassador before, an ambassador in Ottawa. I do find it interesting that, despite the importance of this relationship, there aren't a lot of the same institutions that I see with many of our other partners. And one of the ones I would use, I'll use Korea as an example, and I know sometimes people don't like the comparison, but Korea has a very active civil society in Canada. It's pretty impressive. There are a number of different groups driven by the diaspora community, academic community, and others. Is a really active community, ongoing events that focus on the relationship. And I think there are other bilateral relationships where you see that too. For whatever reason, that's never taken place with Japan. There isn't an annual Canada-Japan summit, as far as I can tell, for example. In terms of the business community in Canada, there are some Canada-Japan entities, but they tend to exist more at the city level, not at a national level. You don't have, say, like a Canada-Japan Business Council in Canada, for instance. Which I think is interesting when you consider how large it is, and if you were to compare many of our international partnerships, that those institutions have never formed. So it's an interesting feature of the relationship. I don't have a good reason to explain why that just hasn't formed, but I would say on a positive note that I think, particularly if you look at among younger Canadians, I can't consider myself young anymore, but I am a millennial. But millennials and Gen Z, there does seem to be a real growing interest in Japan. I mean, if you look at going back to the tourism numbers, it's remarkable. I can't believe how many Canadians are coming here every year. I was surprised to see recently that there's just a large number of exchange students now, and that's building upon many years of people coming to Canada on working holidays. So I think there's a real strong youth connection, or younger Canadian, younger Japanese connection that could probably be leveraged more effectively. But it has been surprising to me that at that policy level that there just hasn't been that kind of regular national dialogue that you see with many other bilateral relationships for Canada. So maybe it's something that that Japan Foundation can lead the way on, and I'm sure be happy to have a conversation. I know APF is also doing a lot of great programming. So, but I don't know. It just has never formed for this relationship for whatever reason, and I think it's a real missed opportunity. And I would point back to a lot of policy discussions in Canada where I think there could be opportunities to share that perspective. I know in recent years there's some parliamentary debates around the Indo-Pacific and key markets and diversification, and there doesn't, there are other markets once again where there are speakers and organizations that are very active and advocating and sharing the views of the broader economic relationship, and it's just haven't seen that for Japan for whatever reason. So anyway, hopefully we can all work together with fixing at some point in time. But despite that, I think we've never had a stronger relationship than we have today, and the people-to-people ties are pretty remarkable.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that, Trevor. Just might add on that comment. I know Yamamoto-san and I have also had similar conversations about this need for a policy network. And I did mention that there was something called the Japan Futures Initiative, and it still does exist. And I remember at the last Japan States of Canada Association conference, they were looking for ideas on funding and also who can take it over for the next generation. But that association is also primarily academics working in the social sciences and political science area. But I would agree more needs to be done here. We have 5 minutes left, but I just want to ask one last question. I know I've asked this to you before, Trevor. But I'm going to ask it here is, so the Business Council of Canada, like you said, your role is involved in looking at all of Indo-Pacific. And when it's looking to look at the whole region and looking at all the trends of everything Canadian going to Southeast Asia right now, why did the Business Council choose Tokyo in Japan, of all places, to start branching out into the Indo-Pacific with a in-region presence?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think if you look at setting up an office, you have to choose somewhere. That was, I guess, a starting point. We had to set up an office, a coordinating office in one destination or other. There were other obviously very attractive places. You know, Singapore, for example, is an often location that comes up as a hub. There were some other countries that certainly expressed their interest. I think the strength here, I mean, there was obviously a personal connection having me come over and given my background and my family as well. It was a more familiar place to set up and operate. But I do think that in this day and age that it's a pretty strategic decision, and we are once again witnessing a real I think a deepening of our relationship. I'm seeing growing business interests. I'm also seeing a lot of people flow through Tokyo, which is great to see. A lot of it's Canadian officials, Canadian businesses on their way to other parts of the region. So it's worked out to be a pretty efficient hub, directly connected to Canada. I think there are 5-6 flights per day or more. Actually, I guess that's just even Air Canada. There are so many flights now connecting the two cities, so or two countries, so exceptionally well connected. So it operates as kind of a good touch point. But I think going back to that kind of that economic security side, that shared interest side, and I think that scope to grow our bilateral relationship, it was a strategic decision. But it is a big region, and no matter where you are, whether you're operating out of Singapore or Delhi or Hong Kong or anywhere else, you're going to deal with long flights. It's just a feature of the region. I was surprised flying to Australia recently. I think there was a 10 and a half hour flight from Tokyo to Sydney, and then Sydney to Singapore, 8.5 hours. You know, it's a big region. Flying to India is 10 hours from here. It's still shorter than Canada, but it's not a big difference. So we'll look at bringing on some capacity as a part of my time here, but this is the coordinating hub, and you know, we're really happy. We have long established relationships here, really good relationships with the business community going back 30-40 years with the national associations here. Just a really strong sense of, I think, goodwill for this relationship. And yeah, I think we're really happy with the decision so far. And yeah, there would have been some upsides and downsides to any part of the region that we decided, but this one, it seems like it's been a good decision. And particularly now you're seeing once again that discussion around like-minded partners. And it's not a long list of countries that are truly like-minded across the board. So I think between here and maybe South Korea and Australia, New Zealand, it's really the countries that most align with that perspective. Anyway, feel quite good about the decision, and personally, I'm very happy to be here. And I should always tell people this was not my my idea. I was asked to come here and set this up, and given the opportunity to do it from Tokyo. So really thank our CEO and our members for giving this opportunity. But there's a lot of goodwill for this market.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We are approaching time, so if you have other questions for the people online or in the presence, I encourage you to reach out to Trevor directly through the Business Council of Canada. So once again, thank you to Trevor for taking the time on your morning or evening. So just a nice round of applause for you.
Thank you very much.
Yamamoto-san was talking about part of the idea of this series is to help create a network as well, grassroots, small driven. So please spread the word. This is our second session in the series. We're hoping to have another speaker in the series within the next month or so. And if you want to hear about that upcoming event, please sign up for David Lam Centre's mailing list, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well and share any updates on that. So once again, thank you to the David Lam Centre and the essential contributions and support from the Japan Foundation Toronto. So thank you so much.